Welcome to the Cambridge International Training and Education presentation introducing the BTEC suite of qualifications for examinations officers and those working with external examinations. The aims of this presentation are for you to understand the key concepts involved in studying for your chosen qualification, to provide some background information on the BTEC suite of exams officer qualifications, to identify what works well and what to avoid, and finally to tell you something about how your work will be assessed. Those working in examinations display a wide range of competencies. These are broadly categorized into knowledge and understanding and your own personal skills. All three exams officer qualifications test these to a greater or lesser extent. If we look at knowledge and understanding, the qualifications test how qualifications are structured, how they're assessed, how entries are made, and how examination integrity is maintained. And also, under this category, how results are generated and issued. You'll also be expected to demonstrate a wide range of personal skills, particularly in administration, planning, communication, management, and analysis and evaluation. I'd now like to say something about the background to the qualifications. First of all, it's important to recognise that the qualifications are part of the BTEC short course framework of professional qualifications, and that they recognise the complex nature of the role of examinations officers and those who are working in examinations. It provides for the continuing professional development of exams officers. But most importantly, and you will see this when you read the specifications, it's been developed with the assistance and support of practicing exams officers. The qualification is available at three levels, levels 2, 3 and 4, and these match the National Qualifications Framework levels. The level 4 qualification, the highest level, contains key managerial, planning and analytical skills, the type of things you would expect from someone operating at level 4. One important piece of information you need to know is that you can gain the qualification of whatever level using evidence from your examination work with any awarding body. And finally, the courses have been designed so that you can study them as distance learning programs. The three levels all have slightly different titles. The intermediate award, or level 2, is known as Introduction to Administering Examinations. Moving up the levels to level 3, or the advanced award, this is entitled Administering Examinations. And finally, at the highest level, level 4, or the professional certificate, this is known as Managing Examinations. I'll now say a little bit about assessment. First of all, your evidence is gathered in a portfolio. There's no tests or examinations. It's what we call a criterion reference qualification, where you have certain assessment criteria which that evidence must match. One of the things you'll be doing is listing and referencing this evidence and then judging it against these assessment criteria. You then submit the completed portfolio for assessment, and one key point to stress is that you will already have the majority of evidence in your workplace. In gathering evidence, we talk about two types of evidence that go into your portfolio. One is called off-the-shelf evidence, and the other self-generated evidence. The off-the-shelf evidence is already in existence, literally taken off the shelf as part of your normal work. The self-generated evidence is what is required for the qualification and is likely to be what you should be doing but do not have the time or the direction to do. But please note, both types of evidence, when they go in your portfolio, need to be referenced. When you're gathering evidence for your portfolio, you will gather that evidence from a range of sources, what we call taking a holistic approach. That evidence could include things like memos, transcripts of phone calls, screenshots, photographs even, and reports, particularly your inspector's report, which is a great piece of evidence of your efficiency and effectiveness in the exams office. You'll then match that evidence to the assessment criteria which we introduced earlier. You'll then do referencing or cross-referencing this to complete your evidence forms. Whilst you're doing that, this will also lead to you identifying any gaps you may have in your portfolio of evidence. The evidence we mentioned before are what we call off-the-shelf evidence. Your self-generated evidence will also include witness statements and personal statements. In either case, these are evidence of your capability as an exams officer. Witness statements by someone who knows and understands your work, and personal statements, those that you write, describing your work and how efficient and effective you are in managing or working in the exams office. Let's now have a look at what works well, what previous candidates have found of most use in getting them through the course. Firstly, keeping in touch with your tutor is absolutely vital, particularly if you want feedback on your work. Many exams officers have also found working with colleagues of great benefit. And also, thinking about the course portfolio as a kind of manual that they could hand over to a successor. It's also important to think about the whole 12-month cycle and all the different jobs that you do in those 12 months and all the different types of evidence that you will gather over a 12-month period. What also works well is thinking about gathering your evidence holistically, which in effect means not necessarily starting with Unit 1. Start with an area or a unit which you're most familiar with. Then identifying what is existing, what we call off-the-shelf evidence, and what is required as new or self-generated evidence. Another thing that works very well is to use the words of the assessment criteria to structure the evidence. So where assessment criteria says describe, then you describe. Where it says analyse, then clearly you must analyse. And finally, what works well is putting aside regular time to do the portfolio. Most successful candidates find that about half a day or the equivalent per week is what is required to get through the portfolio. Now let's have a look at some of the things to avoid when putting together your portfolio. Trying to make inappropriate evidence fit or rewriting the assessment criteria are common mistakes that some candidates make, particularly when they're starting off. Another mistake is having insufficient evidence for some of the criteria. You ought to be looking at least 2 or 3 separate pieces of evidence for each criteria. And also, something to avoid is sloppy cross-referencing. You need to make sure that the evidence is totally appropriate and relevant for each assessment criteria. What else to avoid in putting your portfolio together? Putting unexplained evidence in the portfolio should be avoided. But also reading too much into the assessment criteria. Just do what the assessment criteria tell you to do. Also, assuming the reader knows you and your centre and your work. Don't forget, your portfolio should be read by anyone, not just someone who knows you. And also to avoid is what we call stream of consciousness writing. Make your writing punchy and to the point. Use bullet points if you need to. When you're working with your allocated tutor, you will of course maintain a professional relationship, the type of thing that you are well used to in your professional work. You'll agree end dates and key milestones to getting your work completed. It's important, as we said already, that you maintain regular contact with your tutor. And then finally, on the agreed milestone, you'll hand in your completed portfolio. So, when you've finally completed your portfolio, there are a number of checks that you need to do. And there's a separate document for that called Last Minute Tips, which you need to read. That document talks about things like checking the paperwork's in order and that every assessment criteria has been met. You will then get feedback from your tutor or assessor on your completed work. And if there's any more work to do or complete, that will be contained in the report. The portfolio will then be subject to both internal and external verification. And finally, you will be awarded your certificate.